हेलो हेलो।
हेलो। मेरी आवाज आ रही है आपको?
हेलो।
Hello
कैन आई एम
everyone. We are live now. We
ऑडिबल?
are live on the broadcast.
ओके। नमस्कार। माई सेल्फ डॉक्टर प्रमोद कुमार गुप्ता, founder Indian Teacher Education Community Group. IETC Group is starting a series of webinars on qualitative education with eminent speaker Dr. Arvind Jha. Dr. Arvind Jha is HOD and Dean, uh, School of Education at Baba Sahab Ambedkar Central University, Lucknow. He was Nehru Fulbright Scholar, and he has revised John W. Best book on research for Pearson Publishing House. Now I invite eminent speaker Dr. Arvind Jha for his deliberation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Pramodji, and thanks to the entire team of Indian Teacher Education Community. Uh, Thanks to all the viewers and all the people who are right now associated with us. And thanks for giving an opportunity to get connected with all of you. Friends, since lockdown, we have talked a lot about the digital pedagogy, digital divide, exploring pedagogy, the transition pedagogy, etc., etc. But this was very apt time for me to, chart on the path which was not so excavated well in the past. And in last 2 to 3 months, I came across several discourses which are prevalent in the field of education, and several people whom I just heard about uh, them, but I hadn't excavated well their ideas. So I thought it's better to share my understanding related to that with all of you. Friends, what I actually intend to do is this is just a very chaotic lecture today, and I'm not in a mood to present anything in a clear cut picture so that you can understand everything. Rather, I must confess that today I'm starting this lecture with this feeling that I'm going to create a kind of chaos in your mind and try to understand education as a phenomenon, that what are the things that really operate underneath. Is education so obvious as it appears to us, or education is something more? And if education is not so obvious, then what is that education? And that's why, so one day I was thinking that I should talk something different. uh, Recently I have developed my interest in the narrative inquiry and the discourses analysis, and combining the two, I thought I should talk about education from these two perspectives. And thanks to Dr. Pramod Gupta, who kindly agreed that, sir, why don't you share this on our platform? I said, fine, let's go ahead. Um, but yeah, what I would like, that it's not that it will remain one-way traffic, it will remain two-way, or I say multi-way traffic, that someday some of you who are associated with me today, if you find something like this you have better than me to talk, I would love to listen to you. So you will also be invited to share your ideas and thought from this perspective, from the narrative and discourse analysis perspective, and we all engage ourselves in that discourses so that we can create and develop our own narrative, which I call the grand narrative, the individualistic grand narrative, not the hegemonic grand narrative, friends. So now I'm going to share my screen, and through this, just to remain uh, mm, confined to the topic, not to get disarray, I just want that I should be presenting my ideas through PPT. So friends, what I'm going to do is that why not I should start the genesis, that how I started conceiving this idea. Now, this is in front of you. प्रमोद जी, आप मेरे स्क्रीन शेयर को देख पा रहे हैं? प्रमोद जी, आप मेरे स्क्रीन को देख पा रहे हैं? Hello?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible now.
Is it visible? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So you be online. Whenever I need your help, please help me that way. Right? So
Yes,
this
sir.
is my
Yes, sir.
documents,
Where?
grand initiatives of educational discourses. And I'm sharing my email with you. Please help me to develop my ideas on this topic so vigorously, so that we can exchange our ideas, and we can exchange our ideas in a critical manner, not in a factual manner, right, friends? Because I think that's the only way we can grow together. Well, so now, what is the background? Background is that this discourse is inspired by the various works of various thinkers, as said in the beginning. And lockdown was a very appropriate period for me to orient and expose myself to the works of marvelous people who have done wonderful work. But I'm not going to share my ideas from anyone's perspective, but from my own perspective. But yes, my today's presentation is inspired by people like Jean-Francois Lothiard, Peter Berzen and Luckman, Michael Apple, of course, Henry Zero, Joe Kincherle, Bourdieu, Stanley Arnovich, and John Hegel. I'm underlining the name John Hegel. Why? You will come to know why I'm mentioning John Hegel in particular. And the works that really impressed me a lot, the first work that I read, that is the Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge. You know, knowledge and epistemology is my core area, in which I love to indulge myself, plunging deep into it to understand the various seeds of epistemic aspects of knowledge construction. And then there was another work, Postmodernism and Education, Education and Power, and Knowledge and Critical Pedagogy, Critical Constructivism Primer, Teachers as Intellectuals, etc., etc. So what do I intend from here? I intend from here that in future, along with you, and on that journey, I'll seek very active help and support from each one of you, so that I want to build a community to try to understand education as a phenomena, which is not only isolated phenomena, but the relational and related phenomena. So I'll be talking about in future on very extensively on epistemic discourses, then the pedagogic discourses, critical pedagogic discourses, positivistic and regulatory discourses. What are the dominant discourses, and what could be the possible alternative discourses to that dominant discourses? Also, I would love to talk about transformative critical pedagogic discourses. But at the same time, when I'm mentioning all these things, I'm not intending to share my understanding from the Majoritarian point of view or the hegemonic point of view, but from the marginalized point of view. And that's why I would love to talk about the deficit discourse, discourses of deconstruction and reconstruction, knowledge and power discourse, professional discourses, particularly in terms of the competent craftsman, which people call that, the training discourse. People like us don't like this word, but I mean, when you will scan through the various literature, you'll be surprised to see that the professional discourses are largely governed by the competent craft person discourse, which is called the trading discourse. The second, the reflective practitioner, that the appeal of reason. When you say the reflective practitioner, it means you're negating the importance of emotion. And I have maintained in my life, after studying Damasio's very extensively, Damasio's work, arriving at the conclusion that no emotionality is possible without rationality, and no rationality is possible without emotionality. And the charismatic subject, like people say, oh, teachers are made in heaven, wonderful teachers. And that's why you're the charismatic subject. I'll also love to talk about the power and political discourse in education and of education. So, of course, when I say the philosophical discourses, it's not only the epistemic discourses, but also the ontological and axiological discourses. Then another discourse that I would love to share with you, that will be the noetic discourses. Of course, the psychological discourses, the didactic discourses, and very recently, people are claiming that we are living in the knowledge society. So my question is it really true that we are living in a knowledge economic society? So I'll talk about the knowledge economic discourses. Why I'm saying this? Because very recently some people, wanted my help to help him to understand the knowledge economic discourse and what are the key factors that operate in it, and what kind of questions are, pertinent in today's higher education. So why I'm saying this? Because when I was formulating the questions for the knowledge economic discourses, I came to know that keeping the pathetic performance of the Indian universities in mind, I wanted to know why at the level of selection of human capital, intellectual capitals, doesn't remain the sole criteria. Why at the level of selection of the human resources, other than intellectual caliber and intellectual capabilities, there are n number of factors that operate underneath. And that's why it is very important to delve deep into the various discourses that are operating in the field of education itself. And apart from this, I will also share in future the epistemological significance of narratives. Critical humanism in education. I was reading one article regarding the scientific humanism and how to humanize the scientific pedagogy, not from the epistemological point of view, but also from the aesthetical point of view. As one of my research scholars, she's also working on that. So I would love to share with you the critical humanism in education. Also, the practice discourse, and practice discourse not as an isolated phenomena, but the practice discourse as political ideologies. See, when I'm saying political, not the political activities means what the political parties do. And that's why I'm very critique of, and recently, I was sharing on one platform, and the characteristics, behavior of the political parties in India as an ideological party, as an opposition party, you will find the contrast between the two. And the recent lockdown phenomena is a good example of that. So, in future, I would like to talk about the practice discourse as political ideologies, of course, inspired by all these people whom I have just mentioned, and knowledge and power discourses in education and of education. And yes, my own domain, the critical epistemology and the discourse of the deconstruction and reconstruction. So my presentation in next 45 minutes or 1 hour, first I'll try to set the context. Setting the context, I'll move over to some discussions and deliberations purely from the narrative and discourse point of view, and then the educational goals discourse. Because till date, when we look at the sociological point of view, they say, oh, education goal is this, this, this. When you look at the educational goals discourse from the philosophical point of view, it dictates educational goals should be this, this, this. And similarly, other point of view, you will find numerous things. So the question is, what kind of educational goals are there in the discourses of education, and what kind of questions are the key regarding the educational goals that I'll be talking about. And then lastly, very briefly, I'll be talking about dominance to alternatives. And maybe the next lecture, I'll concentrate on this only, friends. But when I was, trying to excavate it at a deeper level, some questions came in mind. And that's why I'm presenting before you the random questions. And the very first question came in mind was, are all narratives constructed one? क्या जितनी भी narrative हैं वो सब बनी बनाई हैं या कोई हमें देता है? Second, how a human being creates his or her own narrative and how education shapes these narratives and vice versa. ऐसा नहीं होता कि केवल education ही मुझे help करता है मेरी अपनी narrative को construct करने के लिए. क्या मेरी narrative भी education की narrative को shape करता है? The third question that came in my mind was, what is the interplay between the narrative and discourse of education? Is there any correlation? Or both are the disjoint phenomena? If there is some correlation, I mean, who is influencing how? And what consequences take place? So whether narratives influences discourses or discourses influences our narratives, this question also came in mind, friends. Then another set of questions also emerging, because every day I confront with the new questions, and that's why I said today what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a chaos as far as the narratives and discourses of education are concerned. So how discourse of education is constructed, if it is a constructed at all? If it is a given, then no question. If it is a constructed one, then how discourse of education is constructed? And in that process of construction of discourse of education, what are the factors that play important roles? When I'm saying important roles, I'm not talking about only the central role. It could be even the peripheral role, but still, peripheral roles are as important for me as the central roles, friends. So in this discourse, where is an individual and what roles are played by that individuals? I as a teacher, some of you as a researcher, some of you as a budding scholar, some of you as a, future carrier of the educational discourses. Okay, and then another question came in mind, what is this narrative and grand narrative? And that's why I'll present my view that though I'm very much inspired and impressed by Lyotard's work, but at the same time I have my own position, right? How do I differ from Lyotard's work? So contextualizing the narratives and discourses in constructed paradigm of education reality will be the key phenomena, which I alone cannot do. In the process of contextualizing the narratives and discourses in constructed paradigm of education reality, I'll be needing help from all of you, friends. So, but then, what are the perceived discourses of education? Our teachers, as many scholars have said, that the teachers are the transformative intellectuals or the critical conscious people. My question is it really so? In today's concept, can you say that the teachers are really transformative intellectuals? And I'm sure, friends, by the time this lecture will be over, many more questions will be there in your mind. If not today, maybe tomorrow, or maybe day after tomorrow. Please share those questions with me. Those questions will help you not only to delve deeper into the educational discourses, but when I'll delve deep into that educational discourses, I want to peep into from my own narratives. Why I'm saying so? So that narrative will help me to develop my own narrative, which I call the grand narrative. So my grand narrative is not the narrative which is a hegemonic narrative, which is just silencing every other narrative which comes from other cultures' perspective or other socio-political, socio-economic, socio-cultural dimensions of education as a phenomena. No, it is not going to subsume everything. So let me start with the narrative. Narrative has been defined as the relationship between what is being told, that is its content, and how it is being narrated, that is its form. For whom it is intended, that is its audience, and where it is occurring, that is its context. Like, I'm very keen that if I really want to understand, science education in modern context, then why not to interview some of the finest, scientists from the world and simply ask them to narrate your life story. And out of that, will win a story which which can be can be converted into a shareable story, and I'm sure you'll understand a different kind of various realms of science education. So, friends, that's what I'm saying. Like Stephen and Trad has also talked about this, that bearing in mind the context may shift from the original location of generation of the narrative to the new location where it is being read or heard. So narrative occurs, how narrative occurs? Narrative occurs at three different epistemological and theoretical levels, friends. First, at the meta or grand level, in which fields or traditions of inquiry are defined and legitimized, number one. Second, at the measure or intermediate level, in which national or regional narratives are espoused and again legitimized. And third, and finally, at the micro or personal level, in which individuals give a narrative account of their lives. And for me, today onward, this micro or personal level of narrative account is more important than anything else. Well, friends, so why I'm saying this, that for me the personal narrative account is more important than any other. Why can't we accept personal narrative account as a grand narrative account? Simply because it has a unique capacity to fathom the essence of human experiences. And as Dr. Gupta said, qualitatively, if you really want to understand education, I'm not negating the importance of quantitative. Quantitative has equal potential to make us aware of education as a phenomena, to understand in its subtlest form. It has a unique capacity to fathom essence of human experience, because qualitative dimension of education is more concerned about the human experiences than anything else. Like my experience in a different educational institutions, how those experiences have really shaped me, my thinking, my discourses, and ultimately my narratives. And that's why here I would like to quote Clendenin and Conley have made a good cause for narrative as epistemological stance, research methodology, and scholarly discourse, and all uniquely capable of getting at the content of human experience. So you can, you can have the access to the content of human experience through epistemological stance, or the research methodological stance, or simply scholarly discourses. That's it. So narrative captures and investigates experiences as human beings live in them, live in time, live in space, live in person, and live in relationship. And that's why, I'm not surprised that my relationship with each and every individual in my life has really shaped me in a particular way. And that's why Kenneth Gergen has talked in great length about the relational curriculum, relational pedagogy, and relational rationality instead of isolated rationality. So narrative captures and investigates experiences as human beings live them in time. So time is very important. In space becomes very important. In person becomes in your life very important. And the relationship with which you live in your society, in your culture. in your working place. So human lives are woven of narratives, friends. And that's why ultimately all educational discourses help me to have my own narrative of my life. Why I'm saying this? Because individuals construct their identities through their own and others' narratives as well. Maybe if I read when I was reading Peter Bergen and Luckman's work, which was published way back, and I thought, oh, why not I should work on some extended pedagogy? Why my life should end with constructivist pedagogy or critical constructivism? Something else. And so marvelously, he has conceptualized the concept of the phenomena of knowledge in the society. Every present moment has a narrative past and narrative future possibility, friends. And for me, future possibilities are more important than anything. Of course, the future possibility is founded upon the present and the past, but the future possibilities are more important for me than anything else. Social phenomena become a converging point for three things: for the individual, for the collective, and the cultural narratives. So from cultural narratives also you can weave out a story of science and scientific phenomena, a story about human existence, a story about the phenomenological existential dimension of human life. And that's why narrative inquiry amplifies voices that may have otherwise remained silent. And that's why for me, like in democracy, it is just said, each and everyone's voice is as important, even single voice is as important as the majority's voice. And in short, we can understand narrative inquiry as a storytelling. And the storytelling may be autobiographical, biographical, testimonial, or any other form. Thus, narrative is spoken, narrative is written, or visual story, and can be presented in various discursive formats, serves multiple purposes, and can be approached in diverse analytical and interpretive ways, friends. Like just a few days back, some people shared a picture of me when I was in a university in Canada, Guelph University in Canada, and it was almost 7 years back. And then she was saying that, okay, I was going through all the pictures there, and then I thought, oh, it is yours. Why not? It should be sent to me. And for 5 minutes, I was just staring on my own picture taken by somebody else, right? And I was doing what? And that time, out of that small pic, I was trying to weave a small story of that particular incident which took place at a particular time in a particular place and a particular moment. So if it is a storytelling, then due to complexity and extensive detail, narrative data provide rich description and reveal meanings embedded not only in the content of the story, but also in the words and images used to tell the story. Suppose somebody asks me, you write a small story, maybe 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages out of that picture, and see how do I describe my story? What kind of contents I bring into it, and to share that content, what kind of words I'm using. Why? Because those words are nothing but the images, imagery symbols. So narrative has become one of the most popular postmodern methods because it yields a contextually embedded text or set of images that can be subjected to multiple interpretations and discursive analysis. And today, in a world in which I always say live in, is nothing but the multiple constructed realities. So why not we should celebrate the multiple interpretations and discursive analysis. And also I call it the episodic life stories. Narratives are nothing but the episodic life stories. Some episodes in your life story brings tremendous, importance, and it helps you to shape and weave in a particular story. This morning, one of my friends, very close friends, when we both were in the college, Professor Pradhan, who is the principal of RI Bhopal, and this morning he called me and he said, "Oh, today I'm going to listen to you, and for completely 2 hours I'll be with you." That particular moment, it motivated in a different way. Because see, out of his own life stories and through various episodes, he constructed his narratives and see where he is and where you are or somebody else is. And that's why please be aware of your life stories. Why? Because life stories are basis of narratives. So narratives are what? Now I'm leaving it up to you. You decide in terms of episodic life stories, friends. So all educational phenomena are nothing but the episodic life stories of my narratives, which ultimately I live in my life. It could be mathematics education, it could be philosophy of education, it could be sociology of education, or any discourses of education from the sociological point of view, political point of view, cultural point of view, or critical consciousness point of view, or maybe purely democratic point of view, or the knowledge economy discourses. So narrative, with its universal strength and recognition as a different way to generate knowledge or knowing, to provide a bridge between individual stories of experiences and the social meanings and a spring of other words and cultures, friends. So one of the main advocates of narrative approach is none other than Jerome Brunner, you all know very well. And he distinguishes two basic modes of thinking, the narrative mode and the paradigmatic mode. Simplifying this a bit, the paradigmatic mode, which domain is constituted by theoretic entities such as concepts, inferential rules, fork-knife theories, etc., can be said to describe and explain the world of objects. While the narrative mode is a way to understand the world of subjects. And I'm more interested in that. And I'm sure many of you are more interested in that. And as the title of Brunner's book emphasizes, their personal possible worlds. So unlike the paradigmatic mode, the narrative mode does not aim at establishing objective truth and is not governed by any rules of logical validity or rationality. My story is my story and your story is your story. Why do you like certain stories and why certain stories you don't like? Because of the narratives with which you are living your life. If there is no match, you will not like it. If there is a match, you like it. Or maybe if you are keen to understand the other narratives equally as you try to not only construct and understand your narratives, it might interest you. But appeals to the sense of subjective truth. So it's the subjective truth. Now, this is what you have to decide. Objective truth is more important or the subjective truth? Even science is, if you trace the historicity of the science development, you'll realize that, still that, kind of binary is going on. What is more important? Recently, after almost one decade, I was going through again the Grand Design by Stephen Hawking. And I noticed that at many places, like earlier, I was hardly in a position to understand Grand Design from the critical perspective. But today, once again, when I was going through Grand Design, I noticed that, there was dichotomy in his mental schema of Grand Design in even Stephen Hawking. So friends, What I want to say is that the narratives are not out of the blue creations by isolated individuals, but are constructed in dialogues with others. And therefore, the existence of collective narratives which uphold a commonly shared consensus reality is of crucial importance for the sustenance and functioning of social groups. So not only do these stories constitute group identity, but they also provide mutually comprehensible and acceptable explanations for the behaviors of its members and approved action programs that follow from an individual social role. So that's why, your behavior when you are alone at home and when your behavior at school place or the marketplace or any community place changes. Why? Why don't you behave in a similar fashion? Even if you want, you are not doing. And therefore, I think instead of now talking detail about narratives, I would like to quote one of my recent fellow, because I share my understanding and mental mapping with John Hegel. So now let me talk about the pull of narrative in search of persistent context. As I said, I'll be talking about the setting the context. And John Hegel, marvelously, if you visit his website, you will try to see, and I'm sharing some of the ideas taken from him only with you. If you get time, please go through that. We live in a world, and he states, and I'm quoting from him only, we live in a world of ever more change and choice. A world where we have far more opportunities than ever to achieve our potential. And that kind of world is enormously exciting and full of options. So in that kind of world, the ability to provide persistent context becomes paradoxically ever more valuable. So persistent context, why persistent context? Because the persistent context helps to orient us and connect us in ways that can accelerate our efforts to achieve our potential. Democracy is celebrated for two reasons, not only to live for the community life ethically, but also for the choices and the potentials, realizing the potentials, and having the enlargement of the choices. So in our digital world, content provides progressively chunk up their offerings to provide more choice and easier access. As this occurs, value moves from content to context. So we have already seen a growing emphasis on experience as an important element of context, friends. And that's why capturing the human experience is the ultimate aim of education for me. I'm not saying it should be for you also. So stories have become increasingly important to provide even broader context. Narratives, at least in the way, I'll be using here also, and John Hegel also uses here, are stories that do not end, they persist indefinitely. So till you take life, last breath of your life, friends, right? It will persist indefinitely. Or even inspired by the Hindu mythology and Hindu culture, it may be even beyond that. Unfortunately, you, at conscious level or the memory level, you will not be able to capture that. So they are continuously unfolding, being shaped and filled in by the participants. The stories are about plots and actions, while narratives are about people and potentials. And that's the difference between story and narratives, friends. So narratives provide stability and continuity in our lives, and narrative helps to orient us. In fact, narratives motivate action by helping to make sense of the world around us, and they can diminish our perception of risk while at the same time increasing our perception of rewards. Therefore, by making sense, narrative also help us to make progress. Why I'm saying this? Because narratives have the potential to profoundly shape the future. So what are the roles that narratives play? Narratives also help participants construct meaning. We all are participants in educational discourses, nothing else. We all. The day we entered into the world of education from pre-primary to tertiary level. So narratives also help participants construct meaning, purpose, and identity for themselves. And it ignites and nurtures passion within us. And they help us to imagine new possibilities, develop confidence that we can act to create those possibilities, and motivate us to overcome any obstacles that we face in achieving those possibilities. And that's why I'm saying, please concentrate yourself to create and construct your own narratives. And that's why it is said that what is the need for the new? There is a need to have the new narratives. And the narratives became deeply suspect in the postmodernist world. Now we must pick up the pieces and reassemble them into new and more compelling narratives. So this human need helps to explain the resurgence of fundamentalist movements around the world, as well as the continuing appeal of nationalism trends. So we desperately need new narratives. I mean, when I say new narrative, means newly constructed narratives that will provide alternatives to the older and more confining narratives of education, as we need the different discourses of education, from dominance to alternatives. So what we need are narratives of explorers rather than narratives of true believers. The narratives of explorers emphasize the opportunity to learn and grow by constantly framing new questions and embarking on quest to gain new insights through action. So you create your narratives through actions also. Now, it's high time let me talk about the grand narrative as it is mentioned in the topic. And then once again, maybe if time permits, I'll be back. That why I find myself more closer to the John Hegel than even Lyotard, the French philosopher, whose work is a pioneer in terms of understanding knowledge in a postmodern mode. So grand narratives, the perceived knowledge says that the grand narrative was coined by Francis Lyotard in 1969. For Lyotard, these narratives are characterized as totalizing or explanatory narratives purporting to embody universal essential truths. And because of their suggested universality, they also tend to delink or decontextualize knowledge and knowledge production from context or culture. These are not mine words. This is what the Lyotard says. So these are grand. Why he calls these are grand? Why he said just now that these grand narratives delink or decontextualize knowledge and knowledge production from my context and my culture? As I said, because these are the grand that they seek not only to describe and explain the world, but also to legitimate it. So these narratives, Lyotard argues, are not ideologically neutral, but rather problematic and complex competing knowledge systems established and constantly nourished by Western hegemony, or the power hegemony you can call. Don't call it East hegemony or the West hegemony or this hegemony or that. The power hegemony you can call it. But Lyotard uses word Western hegemony. So for Lyotard, examples of grand narratives are what? Like obsessed with the Marxism. You all know that Paul Freire himself was a communist. But so beautifully he has written in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I'm really impressed by his, there are a number of things, but there are two things. One, very clearly he says, neither follow or be the blind follower of the left or the blind follower of the right. And the second thing, the critical pedagogy, where the culture is in the center. If I'm an Indian, because of my orientation to Indian culture, it may or may not be the religion, but the Indian culture as such. Second, he calls liberalism and all religions, he called it the grand narratives, because all these will compel you to think in a particular direction, to live in a particular way, to speak in a particular way, to share your ideas in a particular fashion, which suits their narratives, not your narrative. People do share their writings, and sometimes I notice that they are more ideological inclined than anything else. Yeah, you can ask a question, is it possible to remain ideological free? That's the second question. And that's why sometimes phenomenologism also talks about that, I mean, a man should try to live with the presupposition-less perception. But how far that's possible? That's a second order question. I'm not entering into that for me, right, for the time being. So the grand narrative or master narrative is a term, as I said, introduced by Jean-Francois Lyotard in his classic work, and this work has really impressed me a lot, The Postmodern Condition, a Report on Knowledge. But I don't share, as far as the narrative interpretation of this grand narrative is concerned, I mean, intellectually, it's a marvelous work, but my interpretation of grand narrative and his understanding of grand narrative is completely contrasting. Maybe you will like much more than I like. But yes, his understanding has really helped me to. I was not aware when I coined this topic, I was not aware that Lyotard has already used this. Anyway, so grand has a connotation as something immense or a spectacular. So can grand narrative therefore be a spectacular narrative? Impressive in view of size or importance. Can it be monumental or glorious or grandiose? So for the time being, my stand is different from, as I said, Lyotard's perspectives. For me, grand narrative is not a dominant narrative, which this point I made earlier. For me, grand narrative is not a dominant narrative which subsumes all other narratives into itself and silences the voices of other narratives. But Lyotard has perceived and defined grand narratives in this fashion only. Rather, for me, it is a one which holds together all the contesting and contrasting narratives in it. And that is for me the grand narrative, friends. And this is the point of departure as far as the stand or the understanding of grand narrative is concerned. My understanding as his understanding. And that's why, I mean, you should have also your own understanding. And that's why we have started this debate and discussion. That read as much as you can, indulge any kind of discourses, but have your own. And that's very important, friends. So not to deny it a voice in the generation and legitimation of alternative narratives and discourses. And therefore, as Kinchele and Stenberg in 1996 wrote, that the grand narratives represent any macro theories that attempt to explain social reality in its entirety. And such explanation, because you'll be saying why you are taking a different stand, why you don't align by the perceived knowledge of grand narrative. No, I being an intellectual person, or if I'm a teacher and I believe in Jiro's understanding that I'm capable to intellectually transform myself and others, then I should have my own understanding and stand of the same phenomena. So Kinchele and Stenberg says that the grand narrative represents any macro theories that attempt to explain social reality in its entirety. And such explanations, by subsuming every aspect into one narrowly defined lens, are overly simplistic in that they suppress differences into homogenizing schemes. And I said the contrast and the context both should be incorporated in that. And from this point, he's right. Now I'll be talking about the discourse and discourses. Why singular and plural? You will realize why I'm deliberately using singular and plural both. So discourse, as political discourse, economic discourse, or social manifestations of power in a justified manner. So you may be wondering why such seemingly complex terms such as discourse and discourse are important for teachers to understand, for researchers to understand, for students to understand, for educational practitioners to understand, friends. If you will scan through some researches done in this area, then you will notice that the research suggests that teachers' discourse or language can contribute to uneven expectations for students in schools, such as when teachers use language that favors students more like themselves. And it also suggests that when teachers examine their own discourses, they may better understand who they are as teachers and how their discourses might lead to inequity in the classroom and outside the classroom even. So as teachers think about and work against such discourses, they can provide fair learning opportunities for all students in schools. And I would like to quote here the work of Zeev, G-E-E-E, 2012. He also asserted that as individuals become knowledgeable about theories of discourses, individuals have an obligation to reflect on discourses. If I'm a science student, continuously I should reflect upon the scientific phenomena that are taking place, the scientific discourses that are going on. I'm reminded of by Professor Rajaramanna, one of the convocation address in Delhi University. He says, why science is not progressing? And he made a point that science is not progressing as technology or engineering are progressing because science has forgotten to raise the questions which are epistemological in nature. I quote and unquote. So, as teachers think about and work against such discourses, they can provide fair learning opportunities for students in schools. Like initially, when we thought that we'll be doing some work joining humanism and the science education, never this idea came into mind that we'll be trying to see from the aesthetic perspective also. But way back in 92, perhaps 92, 93 or 91, 92, in my tutorial, one of the professors, he was from English literature background, and he suggested that please read this book written by Chandrasekhar. And now his life narrative or the episodic life stories of his narrative is influencing me a lot. And it can influence, it is capable to influence anyone who has love for science education or to understand the scientific phenomena from the various theoretical perspective. And therefore, and this is our obligation. Thus, as you prepare to assume roles in your schools, colleges, universities, it is important to understand how your discourse influence interactions with your students, with your colleagues, and with anyone, as well as influence your instructional decisions. And there can be conflicts among individuals, multiple discourses and identities, because they do not always represent consistent and compatible values. Like sometimes when I enter my BA class, I find, these are not only 100 students, these are the 100 individuals having 100 life narratives, living with their own life narratives, and consequently 100 political ideologies and discourses. And that's why you'll notice that there are competing discourses. And if in your class, in your working place, or wherever you are, if there are competing discourses, then tensions and conflicts are bound to be there. Now, how will you resolve that? And that's why it is very important to acquaint yourself with the discourse and discourses of education, friends. And tensions or conflict among competing discourses can be the source of struggle and resistance when individuals bring other discourses to their day-to-day interactions. So the values of many school-based discourses or the institutional-based discourses treat certain students as other, which means on the basis of n number of factors. I'm not going to name those factors, but they are the other, which means students are sometimes treated differently because of their maybe the class, the gender, the sexuality, political ideology, religion, anything. So typically individuals do not consider their discourses, and it is almost as if discourses are unconscious. And discourses can be dangerous because they relate to who has power in society and have ways of valuing what is a normal or good in favor of certain kinds of people. And this is what is taking place. And it's not that the presently it is taking place. It has taken place since time immemorial in our society, friends. And that's why I need to be aware of the discourses of education as a phenomena, as a social phenomena, or the cultural phenomena. It is important for individuals, particularly if you are or will be a teacher, to become aware of your many discourses because they will influence your interactions with others. So the three discourses, very briefly, I'll talk about pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, right? Other discourses definitely sometimes we'll discuss and deliberate, and we'll try to construct a particular narrative out of that. But still, I'm not sure whether the narrative influences the discourses or discourses influences the narratives. Sometimes we'll discuss and deliberate and we'll generate some consensus or even no consensus. We will keep on deliberating on the phenomenon. So the three discourses, then there is a three-one discourses, and that is common discourses. I don't know, I'll have sufficient time to talk about the common discourse, but at least I'm going to talk about the pre-modern discourse, modern discourse, and postmodern discourses of education from the epistemic point of view, that is the knowledge point of view. So pre-modern discourses are based on the assumption following from mindless centering on the subjective perspective that there is only one truth, or you said that a kind of perspective that believes only in one truth, that there is only one truth. And that's why people call it pre-modern discourses. And today we all know there can't be one truth. There are multiple truths. Why? Because all truths are constructed truths. So the only truth, in pre-modern discourses of education, determines the ontology of the resulting consensus reality. And its dramatized description is contained in an indispensable grand narrative. And here, from this perspective, Lyotard is right, which constitutes the stemming point for all narrative forms that are available within a given discourse of the pre-modern time frames. So you'll find sometimes I'll talk a discourse as a superset, and narratives are the subsets. Sometimes the narrative is a superset, and all discourses are the subsets, because I'm still confused. I think I need to research more, think more, deliberate more, and discuss more with friends like you. So pre-modern discourses are based on the assumption, as I said, that there is only one truth. So the question of method or other epistemological problems do not arise at all within, at all why? And particularly within pre-modern discourses. You can ask your question yourself. why the question of method or other epistemological problems or methodological problems do not arise at all within pre-modern discourses. It is not only that there is only one truth, but it is taken for granted that the truth is obvious to everybody. सत्य तो एक ही है और सभी लोग उसी सत्य की खोज में हैं और उसी सत्य को कोई नहीं जानता वो सत्य क्या है और कैसा है. और इसीलिए बीइंग ए कंस्ट्रक्टिविस्ट आई एम ऑफ द ओपिनियन कि सत्य एक नहीं है. जितने लोग, जितनी लाइफ स्टोरी, जितनी नैरेटिव्स, जितने डिस्कोर्सेस, उतनी ट्रुथ्स. So it could be said that pre-modern discourses are also pre-Cartesian in the sense that doubts and the quest for a right method of knowledge validation are not present in them at all. इसलिए अगर आप क्लास में एंटर करते हैं एक सत्य को दिमाग में लेके, अगर आप मान लीजिए फिजिक्स की बात करें तो आप न्यूटोनियन मैकेनिक्स को लेके जाते हैं और आइंस्टाइनियन मैकेनिक्स और द क्वांटम मैकेनिक्स को भूल जाते हैं, तो आप के लिए तो कोई सवाल ही नहीं है, उसको जानने का कोई मेथोडोलॉजिकल क्वेश्चन ही नहीं है आपके मन में, क्योंकि आपने पहले ही आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया यही एक सत्य है, बाकी सब सत्य गलत है. So lack of any epistemological awareness implies that the subjectivist versus objectivist orientation criterion does not apply at all, friends, being precluded from operation by what can be called naive realism. So as regards the axiological dimension, pre-modern discourses can be considered fundamentalist. और फंडामेंटलिस्ट गलत नहीं होते हैं, उनकी अपनी डिस्कोर्सेस में वो सही हैं, लेकिन कहाँ गलत हैं? जब वो अपनी डिस्कोर्सेस को एकमात्र डिस्कोर्स बना के बाकी सबके लाइफ नैरेटिव्स को रूल करने लगते हैं. सो यूनिवर्सल इन्फोर्समेंट ऑफ द ट्रुथ guarantees an ideal social order at cost which are unanimously considered just and must be borne by advocates of this and that different truths alike. For example, अगर आप ये कहते हैं कि पॉइंट की परिभाषा वही है जो यूक्लिड ने दिया, कोई और परिभाषा इसकी हो ही नहीं सकती है चाहे किसी भी पर्सपेक्टिव से, तो आप समझ लीजिए कि आप प्री मॉडर्न डिस्कोर्सेस में आप तिजारत कर रहे हैं. So typically, individuals do not consider their discourses, and it is almost as if discourses are unconscious. So discourses can be dangerous in pre-modern discourse. इसलिए pre-modern discourse of education dangerous है हम सबके लिए, because they relate to what has a power in society and have ways of valuing what is a normal or good in favor of certain kind of people. And therefore, it is a very important for individuals, particularly if you are or you will be a teacher and researcher, to become aware of your many discourses because they will influence your interactions with other friends. Now, let me move over to modern discourses. See, though modern discourses, though also based on some truth, but not one truth. That's the departure point here. Some truth and some accompanying grand narrative recognize other perspectives together with the truths that they imply. And that's why it is slightly better than that. So modern discourses of education is, from this perspective, is you can consider is better than the pre-modern discourses of education. So with the possible alternatives in view, the question of validation for one's own truth becomes of crucial importance here. And hence, the ubiquitous problem of the right method of cognition, which within modern discourse is given particular attention. So while the modern truth is not the only possible, it is still the only valid one. यही एक प्रॉब्लम है. वो ट्रुथ को तो मल्टीपल को करता है, लेकिन वैलिडिटी ऑफ ट्रुथ में फिर वो एक वैलिडिटी में ही विश्वास करता है. जैसे कुछ लोग रिसर्च को मानते हैं कि नहीं, क्वांटिटेटिव डायमेंशन से समझा गया रिसर्च है ही वैलिड रिसर्च, और वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड में भी आप देखेंगे कि वो सिर्फ डेटा के मैनिपुलेशन को ही करेंगे। कौन सी डेटा? जो डेटा का क्वांटिफिकेशन कर दिया गया। और मैं आपको बता दूं, सोशल साइंस और एजुकेशन की जितनी क्वांटिफिकेशन है, कम से कम साइकोलॉजिकल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, वो सब मेंटल कंस्ट्रक्शन है, नॉट द फिजिकल से। अब कितने नंबर ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स हैं, कितने स्कूल्स हैं, कितने टीचर्स हैं, क्या रेशियो है, कितना उसका मार्केट इकोनॉमी है, वो दैट्स अ डिफरेंट इशू। Who will talk about the narrative data? And when it will become important? On the one hand, you are saying that the human experience is the essence of education. On the other, you are negating the human experiences, because mostly your human experiences are expressed in the form of narrative data. It could be books, it could be visuals, it could be art, it could be culture, it could be anything. So while the modern truth is not the only possible, it is still the only valid one, for it follows from the only objective method, जिसको logical empirical method कहते हैं. So the selection of the right method is related to another property of modern discourses. Why? Because there is a objectivist orientation. मैं बार बार कहा कि गणित और विज्ञान ने बड़े चमत्कार किए हैं, लेकिन याद रखिए, जो चीजें आपको बहुत अच्छा करता है वो अपने साथ कुछ ना कुछ बुरा तो लेके आएगा, और जो बहुत बुरा है वो अपने साथ कुछ ना कुछ अच्छा तो लेके आता ही है. और क्या किया गणित ने? कहा कि आपको मनुष्य और इस संसार और इस प्रकृति की रियलिटी को समझना है, तो उसको एक ही रियलिटी में समझा जा सकता है, और वो कौन सी रियलिटी है? रियलिटी ऑफ मेजरमेंट. अगर आप उसको माप नहीं सकते हैं तो उस रियलिटी को समझ नहीं सकते. So measurement is the ultimate reality. So modern discourses can be classified as, to some extent, it's a democratic one. And advocates of different truths are considered mistaken rather than able, and the relevant rhetoric is educational rather than militant. So offering various cognitive tools for developing complex explanatory narratives about why the mistaken have made the mistakes they have, and what programs should be implemented with a view to their enlightenment. And therefore, friends, modern interest in these issues, together with an interest in the method, results from a moderate decentration ability, which raises the awareness and recognition of other perspective. And that's the beauty. So one may say that modern social structures are precisely where the problem of strangers arises, becomes visible, and is articulated most accurately. Very quickly, in 5 minutes, or 3 minutes, I'll talk about the modern discourses, or maybe only I'll raise some questions and then I'll finish it. So postmodern discourses contrast with the foregoing two. It is a complete contrast to the pre-modern and the modern discourses of education. Firstly, they do not center around only one truth. And that's why constructivism and constructionism is one of the outcome of the postmodern discourses, friends. So quite the contrary, by recognizing and focusing on the subject's role in cognition, that is the subjectivist approach, they make an assumption, not always explicitly stated, that what is considered true depends on the perspective of the subject. So you cannot tell me what is right and wrong. You cannot tell me what is true or what is untrue. But see what happens. I know this, but when I operate my actions in an institutional framework, I say, no, this is true and this is a false. This is right and this is wrong. This is a good and this is a bad. Always the institutional matrix, operate within the matrix of the binaries. And it appears that you are free, being one of the powerful people in the system, but actually you are more bounded than anyone else. You are more limited in your decision making than anybody else. And since there are innumerable many possible perspectives, each truth is subjective and incomplete, and none can claim to be deemed universal. That is, everyone has his or her own truth. So consequently, there is no need for any grand narrative that would represent the meaning and telos of individual experiences or macro social processes. So my narrative is as grand as your narrative. Contingency here replaces a goal-oriented order as a basic explanatory category. So granted these assumptions, there are no grounds for devaluing any alternative perspective. Any alternative perspective is as grand as mine or yours, friends. Therefore, advocates of different truths are not looked upon as evil or mistaken, but are thought of as simply different. While the focus of attention is on understanding or not understanding their position rather than on arguing for or against their views. So if I'm interested to understand your narrative, I'll understand. If not, then I'm more happy with understanding my narrative. Another distinctive feature of postmodern discourses that sets them apart from the pre-modern and the modern discourses of education is that practical realization of the truth in life outside the private life of its career is evaluated negatively rather than positively. So viewed from that standpoint, postmodern discourses are liberal or outright anarchist. You can say so. No one should tell others what is your right to do. To some extent, it appears as anarchism. No, but suppose everybody is a regulated and disciplined one, why anybody should tell you that, please, if you're coming to the office, come in time? Or if you are doing this way, do in a particular way? And do not provide a fitting framework for developing broad projects of an ideal social order, friends. So whenever such issues are raised in postmodern narratives, the emphasis is put on concrete individuals implementing the project in actual circumstances rather than on the ultimate goals to be achieved. There is no ultimate goals that you have to achieve. Another distinctive feature of postmodern discourses that sets them apart from the two, that is a modern and the pre-modern, is that, as I said, that the practical realization of truth in life. And they are, evaluated, as I said just now, negatively rather than positively. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll stop here and then few questions, and then I'll come to the, as I said, the discourses of goals of education from all these things that we have, and then it will be over to you. Just give me 5 to 10 minutes more. So there is another writer, really, I'm very much impressed by them, and they came out with a book in 1994, Usher and Edwards. He says that a discourse authorizes certain people to speak and correspondingly silences others. See now different position he takes, and at least makes their voices less authoritative, that your voice will have no place in making decisions. Authority will not take care of your view. So discourse is therefore exclusionary. And that's why I'm saying not the discourse, but the discourses. What is your view about that? Please think over this. I'll be sharing this slides with you and come out with your understanding. So some thoughts that came when I was talking, I was thinking to talk about this regarding the pedagogic discourses. Sometime other we'll talk about this. And instead of, and there the modus operandi will be 15 minutes presentation, 15 minutes discussion. And then we'll move over in a dialogical mode. So what is critical to making a pedagogic democratic? And what are the factors that support a teacher to be critical in his or her teaching? Another question came in mind: is the role of teaching in social reproduction and transformation as well? I mean, you can reproduce at the same time you can transform. Don't you think they are contradictory, or both are simultaneously possible? I don't know. You can do the research and you can come out with this. Some researches have been done in India, but still more researches are supposed to be done. What are the key factors that shape pedagogy in classroom practice, apart from this discourse or that discourse? Is explanation of the political subject is relevant to understanding pedagogic practices? And I said time and again, I'm talking about the political subject, not in terms of the way political party behaves or political party acts. Politics is an ethical way of living life. So what is the impact of political subjectivity in registering the conservative structure of schooling and consequently the pedagogy? And what is the critical character of pedagogy, and how will you come to know that? And more importantly for me, what is the nature of classroom pedagogy? Don't you think we need to have other alternative discourses, the kind of discourses that we have? However, great minds have talked about, maybe Apple or the Kinchele or the Henry Zero. I mean, many other people have. But don't you think that, I mean, we should also come out with an alternative discourse? Why I'm saying this? Because an important aspect of teachers' teaching should be the ability to connect the socio-political, socio-cultural, and socio-economic aspects of life to classroom discussions in an organic fashion. And here I would like to quote Henry Zero. Zero has suggested that in transformative pedagogic practice, the teacher critiques the conservative, authoritarian practices of education. And he argued for a democratic and emancipatory authority among teachers in the classroom, in the school, in the society, in any educational institutions. And to that extent, any institutions of the world. An important aspect of teachers' teaching should be the ability to connect, as I said just now, in an organic fashion. And he has underlined that the concept of emancipatory authority suggests that teachers are bearers of critical knowledge, rules, and values through which they consciously articulate and problematize their relationship to each other, to students, to subject matter, and to wider community. And therefore, there is a need to move from dominant discourses to alternative discourses. And here the work of Peter Moss is very important. Peter Moss in his writings quotes Foucault, who said in 1980 that each society has its regime of truth, its general politics of truth, that is, the types of discourse which it accepts and makes function as true, the mechanism and instances which enable one to distinguish true and false statements, the means by which each is sanctioned, the techniques and procedures accorded value in the acquisition of truth, the status of those who are charged with saying what counts as a true, unquote. So the questions are how the dominant discourses neglect the importance of other narratives. Why the dominant discourses neglect the importance of other narratives? And one of the dominant discourses he in his writing talks about the story of quality and high return. See, the entire academic world is obsessed by the word quality education. And a high standard in terms of high returns. because education is an investment today in terms of knowledge economy. And that's why one day we'll definitely discuss and deliberate on knowledge economy discourses. And for him, the grand narratives of capitalism, grand narratives of religion, patriarchy have shaped many of the cultural truths and practices in our everyday lives. And school or the university or the colleges as cultural institutions reflect the effects of the discourses produced by these narratives. And that's why here it is very important to talk about Friedman, who wrote, I quote, "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change." And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. See, today what is happening? Everybody is thinking, oh, we have got the perfect replacement of face-to-face education, and that is online. Maybe this afternoon at 3 o'clock, I'll be talking about the discourses of the digital education in consonance with the evolving pedagogy. Let's see how I unfold myself. I don't know. I haven't still thought about that, but I'll be talking about that. So when that crisis occurs, as I said, it depends on the ideas that are laying around. That, he says, I believe is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. Now, let me conclude with the educational discourses. And here, there is another writer who writers, they are writers, they have really influenced me. And I would like to name them Robin Usher and Richard Edwards. In postmodernism and education, both Usher and Edward write that education is perhaps the most important way we relate to the world, to the way we experience, understand, and attempt to change the world, and to the ways in which we understand ourselves and our relations with others. And it helps us to shape. I quote, I've taken all the clues from Robin Usher and Richard Edwards, that it shapes of subjectivity and identity so that subjects become fully autonomous and capable of exercising their individual and intentional agency and bringing out the inherent potential to become self-motivated and self-directing. And that's why they write that the education can be seen as the vehicle for which modernity's grand narratives, the Enlightenment ideals of critical reason, individual freedom, progress, and benevolent change, and they are substantiated and realized. The very rationale of the educational process and the role of educator is founded on modernity's self-motivated, self-directing, and rational subject frames. So to a great extent, education is considered in terms of autonomy and rationality. But what kind of rationality? Isolated rationality or relational rationality? If we'll go through the works of Gergen, whom I met, and really has done profound work, tremendously profound works he has done. He is in favor of relational rationality. So the dictum about the necessity to educate is a clear assertion of the legitimacy of those who possess true, valid knowledge, not only to pass this on to others who do not possess it, but tell others what to do, how to behave, what ends to pursue, and by what means. This is what, don't you think all the discourses, philosophical and and sociological and psychological discourses have done to us. Education should be there. And ultimately, what happens in institutionalized form of educational settings, that education is expressed through a legislative discourse, and that's why you have national curriculum framework or the national education policy. Just go through the all national education policy. Yeah, very clearly you'll find that how they are dictating the terms without considering and giving the importance of the human experience of an individual. So what Usher and Edwards are pointing at here is that education is not just a neutral instrument to impart knowledge. Education is a device of power and control, whose chief purpose is to reproduce the dominant values of society and to legitimate its authority. Yes, that's true. So educational narratives not only tell us where we belong, they put us where we belong. So friends, I'll not go into detail. Sometimes else I'll talk about this, but there is a need to have the larger discourses of education. You indulge yourself, you plunge deep inside into it, and then come out, and then your indulgence, the intensity of indulgence will be completely different. सबसे पहले एक बार डुबकी लगाइए, और एजुकेशन जो एक घटना है उसको उस चश्मे से देखने की आवश्यकता है. क्यों? क्योंकि क्या हो रहा है, सब लोग कह रहे हैं कि एजुकेशन जो है केवल पढ़ना पढ़ाना है, सीखना सिखाना है और उसका मूल्यांकन करना है. क्यों नहीं लोग समझ रहे हैं कि एजुकेशन इसके साथ साथ to become conscious of socio-cultural, socio-economic, socio-political and larger democratic issues की चर्चा भी है. आप मैथमेटिक्स कर रहे हैं, आप मैथमेटिकली करिए. कोई म्यूजिक कर रहा है तो वो म्यूजिक की तरीके से करेगा. And see what is happening, how virtual classes are going to address the issue of being critical thinking, critical conscious, and being aware of own cultural capital and its strength. मुझे तो अभी तक नहीं दिखा, कोई भी नहीं. प्रत्येक दिन 1 से 2 घंटा लगाता हूं. पहले मैं जानता था कि 4-5 ऑनलाइन प्लेटफॉर्म है जिससे आप लोगों से जुड़ सकते हैं. आज मेरे पास कम से कम मोर देन 100 है. आज कम से कम 150 की लिस्ट है मेरे पास जो लोग एजुकेशनल कंटेंट को इम्पार्ट कर रहे हैं. बट द की क्वेश्चन इज how these virtual classes are going to address the issue of being critical thinking, critical conscious, and being aware of own cultural capital and its strength. And ultimately, how online mode of transaction is going to address the very basis of knowledge and knowledge of democracy. किस तरह की डिस्कोर्सेस बनाए जा रहे हैं, किस तरह के नैरेटिव का निर्माण किया जा रहा है बिना इंडिविजुअल को किए हुए. एक मार्केट फोर्सेस और कुछ लोग जिससे उसको सबसे ज्यादा बेनिफिट है वो. अभी मैं कुछ दिन पहले एक अमेरिकन यूनिवर्सिटी है, पेपरडाइन यूनिवर्सिटी, और दिल्ली का एक मैनेजमेंट इंस्टीट्यूट है, दिल्ली इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ मैनेजमेंट, दोनों ने मिलकर एक संवाद किया था और मुझे भी 15 मिनट आधे घंटे का मौका दिया था उस पर वहाँ के रिसर्च स्कॉलर और यहाँ के रिसर्च स्कॉलर से संवाद करने का. और मुझे अच्छा ही टॉपिक था एजुकेशनल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन को लेकर. और ताज्जुब हुआ कि वो आईटी के प्रोडक्ट थे, कंपनी चलाते हैं और उनकी पर्सपेक्टिव कैसे नैरोड है. नाम नहीं लेना चाहूंगा मैं उनको. और उन्होंने कहा कि पेंडेमिक एक बहुत अच्छा फिनोमेना हुआ कि कम से कम आज पहले से ज्यादा अच्छी पढ़ाई हो रही है, पहले से ज्यादा अच्छी लर्निंग हो रही है, लोग पहले से ज्यादा अच्छा कंस्ट्रक्टिवली एंगेज्ड है. आई एम अमेज्ड. आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, समथिंग तो हो रहा है. मैं इसको समथिंग इज बेटर देन नथिंग कहता हूं बस. So education is not about skill only, it is about critical consciousness so that you may become cultural producers. And that larger discourse का हिस्सा होने के लिए, right? क्या करें? सवाल अंत में वही उठता है कि जो हेनरी जीरो ने कहा है, एंड लेट मी कोट Henry Zero, that a discourse of anxiety should give way to the discourse of critique and discourse of possibility. And a discourse of possibility means that you can imagine a future very different from the present. और इसी का मकसद ये था कि कैसे कैओस को अपने दिमाग में जन्म देना कि जो आज हैं उसे हम अलग कैसे, अब गुड होंगे या बैड कोई नहीं जानता है। आज तक जितनी हिस्टोरिकल चेंजेस हुई हैं, अगर आप देखेंगे तो हरारी ने अपनी किताब में बड़ा ब्यूटीफुली लिखा है, तो आपको ताज्जुब होगा कि वो अच्छे के लिए हुआ है, बुरे के लिए कोई नहीं कह सकता है। चाहे वो कॉग्निटिव रेवोल्यूशन हुआ, वो तो हर वो पहली रिवोल्यूशन कॉग्निटिव रेवोल्यूशन कह रहा है, ठीक अलग एल्विन टॉफलर के अलग, जो एग्रीकल्चर वेव, इंडस्ट्रियल वेव और नॉलेज वेव की बात करता है, उसका ठीक उल्टा ये बात करता है हिस्ट्री का व्यक्ति, हिस्टोरिकल सेंस में बात करता है। और इसीलिए जीरो का ये कोटेशन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है, और इसीलिए मैंने शान के ग्रैंड नैरेटिव्स ऑफ एजुकेशनल डिस्कोर्सेस बात करने की कोशिश की। एक क्योटिक और क्राइसिस के पोजीशन में हम अपने को लाके तो देखें। So a discourse of anxiety should give way to a discourse of critique and discourse of possibility. And a discourse of possibility means that you can imagine a future very differently from the present. So let's visualize a different education for a different culture. I'm very sorry, मैंने सोचा था 12-15 तक अपनी बात को समाप्त करूंगा, लेकिन मैं कुछ ज़्यादा समय ले लिया। आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद मेरे साथ रहने के लिए। और अब हम एक साथ मिलके ये नहीं कि आपके प्रश्न होंगे और मेरे उत्तर होंगे, बल्कि जो भी क्वेरीज हैं, क्योंकि मैं इंक्वायरी और क्वेरी में विश्वास करता हूँ। हालांकि रसल तो कहते हैं इन फिलॉसफी इट्स नॉट द आंसर विच इज मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट, रादर द क्वेश्चन विच इज मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट। और बात में समझ में आया वो इसलिए कहते हैं बिकॉज ओनली द राइट क्वेश्चन कैन लीड यू टू राइट आंसर। और हर राइट क्वेश्चन इंक्वायरी में छिपा होता है और क्वेरीज में छिपा होता है। It's over to the organizer. If there is any question, I would love to interact with them.
Hello.
जी,
Am I audible?
जी, बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल।
Actually, some viewers are asking that, sir, what is the meaning of grand?
Okay.
Grand narrative.
चलिए, एक क्वेश्चन ये है ग्रैंड नैरेटिव का मीनिंग क्या है। ठीक, दूसरा क्वेश्चन। जी, दूसरा क्वेश्चन।
I repeat.
हाँ, ये रिपीट, ये दूसरा बताइए। ये प्रश्न मैं सुन लिया और समझ भी लिया, उसके बाद दूसरा क्वेश्चन आप बताएं।
Okay, so it looks like that Pramod sir got disconnected. So let me just ask the next question.
पार्टिसिपेंट को ले सकते हैं।
Yes. So we have the next question on screen. The question is,
हाँ, बोलिए।
can I understand narratives are the basis of constructivism, and moreover, do we need to justify our narratives every now and then, being as a teacher?
देखिए, पहले ठीक है, ये दो प्रश्न को हम लेते हैं। पहले इसी प्रश्न को लेते हैं, फिर हम ग्रैंड नैरेटिव पे आएंगे। देखिए, पहला ये जो सवाल है कि नैरेटिव्स आर द बेसिस ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्टिविज्म, ये कहना बड़ा मुश्किल है कि आप ये कह दें कि इसका बेस क्या है या उसका बेस क्या है। अब बेसिस, किसी चीज का बेस होने के लिए एक आइडियोलॉजिकल स्टैंड पॉइंट भी हो सकता है, सिंपल आइडियाज भी हो सकता है, एंड इट कुड बी एनीथिंग, बट आई एम नॉट श्योर दैट I should say that the narratives are the basis of constructivism. Constructivism has its own epistemic and pedagogic stand, right? And how far they fit into the category of narratives, it's very difficult to say, right? And secondly, your question is, do we need to justify our narratives every now and then, being as a teacher? No, you don't need to justify your narratives. Not at all. You don't have to justify. You live with your own narratives and see how those narratives are just shaping your life episodes, life stories, and out of that, how you can, contribute constructively in helping others to shape their life narratives. No need to justify, because see, how can I justify that my narrative is correct, right, and your narrative is wrong? Or my narrative is the only narrative that is true and correct, and your narrative is not. If I have every right to be correct, you have also every right to be correct. If I have every right to say I'm right in my own way, then why shouldn't I say that you are also right in your own way? इसीलिए मैंने कहा था कि पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म का जो डिस्कोर्स है वो कहीं ना कहीं लोगों को लगता है कि ये एनार्किस्ट को जन्म देता है, बट एक्चुअली वो एनार्किस्ट नहीं है मेरी समझ में। जो पहला प्रश्न था कि ग्रैंड नैरेटिव्स किसको कहते हैं, हमने 2 स्टैंड लिए थे ग्रैंड नैरेटिव्स के, एक लियोतार्ड का और एक मैं। जी हाँ, मैं आपकी आवाज सुन रहा हूँ। लियोतार्ड का जी जी बिल्कुल, लियोतार्ड का जो था वो कहना था कि ग्रैंड नैरेटिव्स वो नैरेटिव्स हैं जो सारे नैरेटिव्स की आवाज को साइलेंट कर देते हैं, जो ये कहते हैं कि तुम्हारी नैरेटिव मीनिंगफुल इनसिग्निफिकेंट है, उसकी वॉइस की कोई जगह नहीं है, और जो हमारा है वही, जैसे कि उसने लियोतार्ड ने यूज किया है वेस्टर्न हेजिमनी, राइट, या एनी आइडियोलॉजिकल हेजिमनी। जैसे मार्क्सिज्म एक ग्रैंड नैरेटिव क्रिएट किया गया और कंस्ट्रक्ट किया गया। रिलीजन जो है अपने आप में एक ग्रैंड नैरेटिव है। अब देखिए कि हर रिलीजन कहता है कि मेरा गॉड ही सही गॉड है और तुम्हारा गॉड सही गॉड नहीं है, और देखिए वो ग्रैंड नैरेटिव कैसे क्लैश करता है। या पेट्रियार्की भी अपने आप में एक ग्रैंड नैरेटिव है, और कुछ हद तक फेमिनिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव जिस तरीके से वायलेंट हो रहा है, या जिस तरीके से अपने को लोग रेडिकल फेमिनिज्म जो है वो भी एक तरह का ग्रैंड नैरेटिव को जन्म देता है। या जब डेमोक्रेसी अपने आप में एक पॉलिटिकल टूल हो जाता है जो आपको अधिकार देने के बजाय आपके अधिकार को छीन लेता है, राइट, तो भी वो एक ग्रैंड नैरेटिव हो जाता है। जबकि उसकी जगह पे जरूरी है कि हर इंडिविजुअल अपनी ग्रैंड नैरेटिव को क्रिएट करे और कंस्ट्रक्ट करे, लेकिन उसमें इतनी गुंजाइश हो कि वो दूसरे नैरेटिव को इनकॉर्पोरेट कर पाए, भले वो कंट्रास्टिंग क्यों ना हो, कंटेस्टिंग ही क्यों ना। अदीन कोई दूसरा सवाल पूछेंगे? How do you become a good online dedicated teacher?
Yes.
Very good question. और आज से संबंध में ये प्रश्न बहुत अच्छा है कि how do you become a good online dedicated teacher? देखिए, to become a good online dedicated teacher, again I'll suggest, and I said maybe after 3 o'clock on one platform I'll be talking about that. Again, you need to indulge yourself on the discourses of digital learning, discourses of digital teaching learning, discourses of digital devices, discourses of digital platform, discourses of digital devices that are being used, and more importantly, discourses of digital design, which people call the dynamic learning design. अगर आप अभी मैं एक आर्टिकल देख रहा था, कल या परसों की बात है, शायद मैं शेयर करूंगा 4 बजे के बारे में। तो मतलब जिसने फीडबैक का दिया इस दुनिया को, आप सबको पता है मिश्रा एंड कॉलर का काम है, और मिश्रा एंड कॉलर ने उस काम को टीपैक का किया, और भारत में भी टेक्नोपेडागॉजी की बात शुरू हुई उसके बाद। और मिश्रा एंड कॉलर का ही वो 3 लोग अपने ही कॉलेज के मिलके एक आर्टिकल लिखा, 2 पेज का वो आर्टिकल है। आप जरा उसको पढ़िए कि देखिए वो कहता है कि क्यों जरूरत, कैसे मूक्स जो है अपने, मैं तो ये नहीं कहूँगा, वो तो कहते हैं वो फेल हो गया। एटलस ने पब्लिश किया था उस आर्टिकल को जिसका चर्चा मिश्रा और कॉलर ने किया, लेकिन मैं कहूँगा कि कैसे वो अपने डिजायरेबल गोल्स को नहीं अचीव कर पाया है, राइट। तो उसका यही है कि बेहतर बनने के लिए अपने को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा एक्सपोज करिए, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ओरिएंट करिए, लेकिन आइडियोलॉजिकली आप ऑब्सेस्ड नहीं हो जाइए। यही एक तरीका है डिजिटल लर्निंग के लिए या ऑनलाइन डेडिकेटेड टीचर होने के लिए। मल्टीपल पर्सपेक्टिव का यूज़ करिए। जैसे अब समय तो नहीं है मेरे पास, वरना मैं वो स्लाइड आपको दिखाता है मेरे पास अभी, कि किस तरीके से 5 डायमेंशन को कंबाइन करते हुए और तब आप ऑनलाइन टीचिंग कर सकते हैं। हो क्या रहा है ऑनलाइन टीचिंग में? एकदम टू द पॉइंट, एकदम आइसोलेटेड टीचिंग, और हमें लगता है कि आइसोलेटेड पेडागोजी का उपयोग करते हुए, हम आइसोलेटेड टीचिंग करते हुए डिजायरेबल गोल्स को, लर्निंग गोल्स को अचीव कर लेंगे। नहीं हो सकता है। तो मेरे पास कोई रेडीमेड सॉल्यूशन है जो मैं आपको बता दूं। मैं तो सिर्फ ये कहूँगा कि जो वेरियस सोर्सेस एंड डिस्कोर्सेस हैं उससे अपने को एक्वेंट करिए, पहले 15 दिन मैं अपने छात्रों से बिल्कुल नहीं जुड़ा, अपने कलीग से नहीं जुड़ा, अपने लार्जर ऑडियंस से नहीं जुड़ा। और अब स्थिति तो ये है कि एक दिन में 2 या 3 बार जुड़ना पड़ता है। कभी के रात के अमेरिका में हमारा शाम होता है, वहाँ सुबह होता है, तो ये भी जुड़ना पड़ता है। तो इससे मुझे फायदा ये हो रहा है कि वो लोग क्या सोचते हैं। जैसे पेपरडाइन यूनिवर्सिटी की मैं आपसे बात कर रहा था, उसका रिसर्च स्कॉलर स्कूल ऑफ एजुकेशन नहीं किया था और यहाँ का मैनेजमेंट ने किया था कि उसकी स्कूल ऑफ एजुकेशन में किस तरह के रिसर्चेस उनके लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्यों यही रिसर्चेस इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्यों एक खास प्रकार के डिस्कोर्सेस को वो एक्सेप्ट करते हैं, उसके पीछे क्या सोच है। तो आपको जानने का एक मौका मिलेगा, आपकी जो थिंकिंग है उसकी होराइजन को एक्सपैंड करने का मौका मिलेगा। कोई रेडीमेड सॉल्यूशन नहीं दे पाएंगे। जी, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन।
हेलो
जी, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन।
Okay, sir. Sorry, it looks like that Pramod sir is still having some issues.
So
So the
you can
next question is,
yeah, you
the
can
next question is, can I understand narratives are the basis of constructivism, and do we need to justify our narratives every now and then? Being as a teacher, oh, I
I
guess
think
it's
I have
yeah,
already answered this question. I have
yeah,
already answered this question. You can move over to another question.
yeah.
Okay,
Is
is this
discourse
question?
nature relative and subjective? If yes, then what is the need to stick to the discourses related to the history of that particular subject, and how practically we can apply these discourses?
Anyway, whosoever has this question, can I have the name, please? No. Whosoever has formulated this question till now, this is one of the best questions. Hats off to you, this question. And let me try to answer your question. But please do write an email to me, and we'll have some interactions on that. So your first question is discourse nature relative and subjective? Yes. Yes. Now the question is, if it is a relative and subjective, then what is the need to stick to the discourses related to history? See, the multiple history, the multiple cultural, the multiple narratives, the multiple discourses will give you an expanded horizon of thinking, right? And on that basis, you can create your own discourses and you can construct your own narratives. And that's why you need to expose to them, number one. So history of that particular subject and how particular, for example, like mathematics is absolute or mathematics is fixed. To what extent mathematics is absolute and to what extent mathematics can be relative also, right? And that's why I need to know the historical genesis of the mathematical development of mathematical contents. All right, like other day, one of my seniors and elder Gurubai was talking about, can Karl Popodian understanding of falsification be applied in the domain of mathematics? And then I got one paper and I said, oh yes, there is some scope, so that's why I think that you cannot reject anything on the ground that it is a relative and subjective, that's why it's not useful. You should accept it, it should deliberate, discuss, because at least it will provide you some exposure. Like, to understand Marxism as a grand narrative or grand discourse, I need to read it. I need to, why Marx said that Hegelian की theory उल्टे सिर की तरफ थी, मैंने उसको सीधा कर दिया. क्यों वो ऐसा कहता है, या क्यों हेगेलियन क्यों उतना इन्फ्लुएंस करता है मार्क्स को, और मार्क्स ने कैसे बाकी लोगों को इन्फ्लुएंस किया, आखिर उसमें क्या ऐसा है. तो जब तक हम पढ़ेंगे नहीं, उसके साथ डिस्कशन नहीं करेंगे, डेलिब्रेट नहीं करेंगे, डिस्कोर्स नहीं करेंगे, हम उसको नहीं समझेंगे. एंड दैट्स व्हाई यू शुड नॉट सिंपली रिजेक्ट एनीथिंग on the simple ground that it is a relative and subject. I think that even if it is a relative and subjective, you should stick to the discourses. Not stick, I'm not saying that कि उसको यही एक discourse सही है. You should orient and expose yourself to the discourses related to the history of that particular subject and how practically अच्छा, तीसरा आपका आंसर था कि how practically we can apply these courses. देखिए, प्रैक्टिकल, जहां प्रैक्टिकलिटी की बात है, मैं बता दूं कि जो मल्टीपल डिस्कोर्सेस है वो तो सबसे ज्यादा मदद करता है. एक एग्जांपल आपको देता हूं. चूंकि मैं मैथमेटिक्स के बैकग्राउंड से हूं, तो ज्यादातर एग्जाम्पल्स शायद मैथमेटिक्स में। जैसे पाइथागोरस जब इस कंक्लूजन पे पहुंचा कि in a given right angle triangle the sum of perpendicular square plus base square will always be equal to hypotenuse square, तो वो कौन सा मेथड अपनाया होगा? अब उसके कई संपाद हैं। पाइथागोरस की एक बड़ी अच्छी किताब भी है, साइकोलॉजी ऑफ मैथमेटिक्स। बहुत पहले जब मैं अमेड में ही था तो देखा था एनसीईआरटी लाइब्रेरी, अब है या नहीं है मुझे नहीं पता। तो अब बड़ा मुश्किल है ये समझना कि आखिर कौन सी मेथोडोलॉजी उसने अपनाई जिससे उस जगह पे पहुंचा। और आज आप देखिएगा कि मेथोडोलॉजिकली उसके 4 ऑल्टरनेटिव्स। तो कौन सा ऑल्टरनेटिव आपके स्टूडेंट को सूट करेगा, कौन सा ऑल्टरनेटिव आपको सूट करता है कंक्रीटली एंड एब्स्ट्रैक्टली, तो इसके लिए जरूरी है कि डिफरेंट डिस्कोर्सेस के साथ आप संवाद तो करें, बहुत जरूरी है। नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन प्लीज।
Okay, so the next question is, narratives can be very confusing and dangerous as mentioned, and it can lead to disoriented truths sometimes. As a teacher, how do we rectify that and give directions to our students?
Yes, I mean, when I was talking about that, the narratives can be very confusing and dangerous, as I was quoting a particular author, right? That in what sense it could be very confusing and dangerous. It will be very confusing and dangerous when the two narratives are the contesting and contrasting, and there is a clash between the two narratives, right? This is one thing I said. And if I'm democratic enough to say my narrative is my narrative and your narrative is your narrative, then it is not dangerous and it is not confusing also, right? But we say that it can lead to disoriented truth sometimes. See, as far as the truthness of truth is concerned, right, there is no but one orientation of truth, friends, as I said. The multiple orientation of truth is there today, and multiplicity and multiple realities of truth are there, right? Not sometimes, always. And this is and that's the beauty of the postmodern thought. So as a teacher, now the question is, how do we rectify that and give directions to our students? See, for that you need to understand the language that your students are using and the language you are using. And that's what I'm saying. Now, language here I'm saying in a larger sense, it's a discourse, and in a narrower sense, only the language as a means of communication. And then you will realize why that particular student or why all those students are using a particular language and why that language is different from my language. What is the reason behind it? Right? Like sometimes, suppose there is a debate between autocracy and democracy, which form of government is better? You know, you'll be surprised to say that we all are living in a democratic country in India, but sometimes voices are emerging and voices are saying that India needs an autocrat. Why? Because perhaps they are not exposed to the autocracy as a form of governance in its subtlest form. So, as far as the rectification is concerned, you need to understand each other very well. Very close dialogue is needed. You need to have close interactions, open dialogues, and a kind of dialogue in which there is a place to give importance to each other's discourses and each other's narratives. Unfortunately, the class culture is as such, 1 hour or 35 minutes or 40 minutes, this opportunity is not there. And that's why you need to invest more time outside the classroom learning and interaction and inside the classroom learning. And give equally, if it's possible, give equal importance to both. So I think dialogue is the key. Without dialogue, nothing will happen. See, all conflicts that have taken place in the world at the political level, socio-political level, socio-economic level, and they are resolved only through dialogue and consensus. No battle has solved this. No war has solved this. No ideological clashes have solved this problem. If the interests are clashing, nothing is going to solve. The dialogue is the key. And unfortunately, today we don't know how to indulge or how to help my students, our students, to indulge in constructive dialogues. So, suppose my teaching subjects or pedagogy is mathematics pedagogy. Can mathematics pedagogy provide a kind of dialogue which no other pedagogy can provide? And this, as a mathematics pedagogue, I must think about that. This is what for the time being. But further, please be in touch. Write to me, and I'll have plenty of time to reflect upon this question, and definitely I'll get back to you. Next question, please. How should we analyze and synthesize any narratives? Yeah, there are, in the perceived knowledge, there are techniques to analyze and synthesize the narratives. Discourse analysis is used to analyze the narratives, and there are software tools also that help you to analyze and synthesize with the help of coding, generating the themes, and then rewriting the narratives or storytelling this. And there are various methods that are helpful to do that, online and offline. And for that, what I can suggest you that please read some of the authors. And today, what is happening? People are using those techniques, research techniques, to analyze and synthesize the narratives. Sometimes when I'll be talking about the narrative inquiry discourses, there maybe I'll be talking about all these things in detail, friends. Let me add, like in India, I use to analyze and synthesize narratives and the data analysis, or particularly the qualitative data, using Atlas TI. And recently, I'm helping one research scholar from Ireland, and she's using NBivo. So I, acquainted myself with NBivo, and I found, and there is another one I was talking other day, and that's more powerful than even Atlas TI and NBivo. So there are software research tools that help us to analyze and synthesize it. And there are other tools also, like we call it analytico-synthetical method, that rational choice and emotional choice. On the basis of that, you do that. Next question, please.
Okay, so the next question is, can you please give some examples of modern discourse?
Yeah, as I said, the modern discourse talks about that there could be not one truth, but there could be more than one truth. But as far as the validity is concerned, there is only one truth. So, for example, one of the examples from a school setting, that whether a student is knowledgeable or not, whether a student is capable or not, whether a student can perform or not in future, all these are validated by examinations, nothing else. If you don't appear in that examination, and if you don't score much, then people say you are not knowledgeable, you cannot perform in future, you are not capable persons. So examination is a valid tool in the modern discourses, and see how powerful it is. Like if you have to do an engineering from IITs, you'll have to appear that examination. If you have missed that, however profound you are, you may be far better knowledgeable, but since the tool that makes your knowledge valid or legitimate, that tool you haven't used, or even if you have used, or even you have participated in that, and you haven't scored much, then everybody will say, oh, you are a failure. But actually that's not. And that's why many people who didn't get the opportunity to study in IITs, in IIMs, or any other institutions, they are doing wonderful. And that's why institution as a valid organization or legitimate organization is a big question today. Yeah, please. Another question, please.
Okay, so the next question is that it was highlighted in the PPT that the value of many school-based discourses treat certain students at other. My question is to how to change the mindset for the same.
बहुत बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न आपने पूछा। देखिए, मैं वही कह रहा हूँ कि अदर और अस की भूमिका के लिए एक जो छोटा सा भी मुझे आ रहा है, क्योंकि युवल नोवा हरारी को अभी रिसेंटली फिर से मैंने पढ़ा, और कि आप जरा हिस्टोरिसिटी ऑफ जेनेसिस ऑफ, मान लीजिए कि कास्ट के आधार पे हम अदर करते हैं, या रिलीजन के आधार पे अलग करते हैं, या रीजन के आधार पे करते हैं, या लैंग्वेज के आधार पे करते हैं, तो आपको लगेगा कि ये सब जो है वो एक क्रिएटेड और कंस्ट्रक्टेड है, इनकी अपनी इंडिपेंडेंट रियलिटी नहीं, ये गॉड के द्वारा या मेटाफिजिकल रियलिटी के द्वारा या ऑन्टोलॉजिकल रियलिटी के द्वारा नहीं किया गया, ऑन्टोलॉजिकल हैंड के द्वारा नहीं किया गया है, ये सब इसी में किया गया है। और इसीलिए मैं अंबेडकर को कोट करना चाहूँगा, मैं अंबेडकर यूनिवर्सिटी में हूँ, उन्होंने कहा कि कौन कहता है कि हायरार्की जो है केवल सो कॉल्ड, अगर अपर और लोअर कास्ट कुछ होता है, आई डोंट नो, तो अपर और लोअर कास्ट के बीच में, विद इन कास्ट एज ए ग्रुप, क्लास कास्ट जिसको आप कहते हैं, उसके अंदर है। अब देखिए कि विद इन शेड्यूल कास्ट के ग्रुप के अंदर है, इसका मतलब है कि कहीं ना कहीं हमारी जो थिंकिंग है वो अभी भी बहुत मायोपिक है, वो ग्रैंड नहीं बन पा रहा है, हम उससे ऊपर नहीं निकल आ रहे हैं, वो जिस पर्पस के लिए किया गया उस पर्पस को हम नहीं जानते हैं, नहीं समझते हैं, और इसीलिए अस वर्सेस अदर के डायकोटोमी में, बाइनरीज में फंसे हुए हैं, और इसीलिए हम कहते हैं कि वो अलग है और हम अलग हैं। और इस माइंडसेट को चेंज करने के लिए तो मैं कह रहा था कि आप ज्यादा से ज्यादा डिस्कोर्सेस में इंडल्ज होइए, ज्यादा से ज्यादा डिस्कोर्सेस के साथ करिए, आप समझिए, जानिए, क्योंकि सारा खेल समझ का है, और बिना जाने किसी चीज को समझा नहीं जा सकता, बिना समझे किसी चीज को जाना नहीं जा सकता, राइट। और वो माइंडसेट हो रहा है चेंज, ऐसा मत कहिए कि चेंज नहीं हो रहा है। हाँ, देखिए, सोशल चेंज उस गति से नहीं होता है जितना कि टेक्नोलॉजिकल चेंज, इंजीनियरिंग चेंज या मेडिकल चेंज होता है, ऐसा नहीं होता है, क्योंकि वहाँ एक खास स्पेसिफिक डिवाइसेस होता है जो सडन चेंज कर देता है। यहाँ अभी तक नहीं समझ पाया पूरी दुनिया में लोग कि वो स्पेसिफिक डिवाइसेस क्यों नहीं है, और वो कौन सा है स्पेसिफिक डिवाइसेस, तो हो नहीं सकता है, और है तो वो कौन सा डिवाइसेस है जिसको घुमाए और आपका माइंडसेट बदल जाए, ऐसा नहीं होता है। क्योंकि आपका जो माइंडसेट बनता है वो उस दिन से बनता है जिस दिन से आप संसार में आते हैं, नहीं, जिस दिन से आप मदर के उम्र में आ जाते हैं, उसी दिन से माइंडसेट का निर्माण होता जाता है। और मैं पहले नहीं विश्वास करता था इस पर, बीबीसी की बड़ी अच्छी डॉक्यूमेंट्री कि मनुष्य क्या होगा वो उस मोमेंट डिसाइड करता है, उस मोमेंट में जब मदर कंसीव करती है, बहुत अच्छी डॉक्यूमेंट्री, वो कभी मौका मिले तो आप देखिए। तो उस दिन से हमारे माइंड को शेप किया जाता है, शेप किया जाता है, शेप किया जाता है, या यूं कहिए इंडोक्ट्रिनेट किया जाता है। एजुकेशन भी तो इंडोक्ट्रिनेशन का काम करती है, इसलिए तो मैंने कहा था उसमें कि मेरा जो ग्रैंड नैरेटिव है वो इंडोक्ट्रिनेशन का काम नहीं करेगा, वो इनलार्जमेंट ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग का काम करेगा, राइट। और वो माइंडसेट एक दिन में नहीं चेंज होगा। टू चेंज दैट माइंडसेट, राइट, परसिस्टेंट एंड कांस्टेंट एफर्ट्स की जरूरी है। चेंज हुआ ना, आप सी आज जिस वर्ल्ड में है आप, जब एक डिस्कोर्सेस किया गया तो कहा गया ना कि जिन लोगों के पास लैंड नहीं है, जिन लोगों के पास कुछ नहीं है, वो कैसे जिएगा, क्योंकि वो भी इसी कंट्री में पैदा हुआ। तो हमारे एक मित्र हैं, मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट भी रहे और मिनिस्टर भी रहे चाड़ी में, वाजपेयी की गवर्नमेंट में। तो वो कहते हैं कि हाँ, एक हम लोग लीगली एम्पावर्ड हैं, आप लोग वैदिक एम्पावर्ड है। तो देखिए, आया ना, दो सिस्टम आया, दो चीजों को किया, तो टाइम लगेगा, लेकिन ये चीजें बदल रही हैं और बहुत तेजी के साथ बदल रही हैं। हेजेमनी, जो पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म का बड़ा कॉन्सेप्ट है कि किसी प्रकार की हेजेमनी को अपोज करने में वक्त लगता है, एक दिन में नहीं होता है, और वो जो हेजेमनी ऑफ माइंडसेट है उसको भी चेंज होने में टाइम लगेगा। आवश्यकता है कि हम एक कलेक्टिव एफर्ट के साथ अगर करेंगे तो ये होगा। होता क्या है कि एक फोर्सेस चलती है, दूसरी फोर्सेस वही काम करने लगती है जो अपोजिशन फोर्सेस करती है, तो वो क्लैश दे रहा है वो। और सोशल चेंज जो है वो सब मेरे समझ से इस पूरी दुनिया के स्लोएस्ट चेंज में से एक होता है। इट टेक्स टाइम, लेकिन हाँ, चेंज होता है, बहुत तेजी के साथ चेंज होता है। अगर आप इसको जब 100 साल के बाद या 1000 साल के बाद देखेंगे तो आप लगेगा, ओए, इंडिया तो चेंज हो रहा है, फिर आपको हेराक्लिटस की बात याद आएगी कि nobody can jump twice in the same river. It means every moment things are changing. हाँ, वो चेंज इतना स्लो है कि हम विटनेस नहीं कर पाते हैं क्योंकि हम अवेयर नहीं है, कॉन्शियस नहीं है, लेकिन हो रहा है चीजें, बहुत एक कंस्ट्रक्टिव चेंज हो रहा है, मैं तो ऐसा महसूस कर रहा हूँ. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन प्लीज.
Okay, so the next question is, how can we make moral solidarity with all aspects of the concerned subject matters?
देखिए, मॉरल सॉलिडारिटी की जहाँ तक सवाल है, अगर आप इसको एथिकल सॉलिडारिटी कर लें तो मैं शायद थोड़ा सा कंफर्टेबल पोजीशन में आ जाऊंगा, क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि मॉरलिटी जो है वो बहुत ही निहायत ही पर्सनल और लोकलाइज्ड होता है. जो एथिकलिटीज़ हैं वो कहीं ना कहीं हम लार्जर इश्यूज को एड्रेस करने के लिए होता है. तो क्वेश्चन आपका है कि हाउ कैन वी, इफ यू अलाउ मी, please allow me to do that, how can we make ethical solidarity with all aspects of the concerned subject matters? देखिए, जितनी भी सब्जेक्ट मैटर्स की कंसर्न्स हैं उसके हर एस्पेक्ट्स पे तो सच में नहीं हुआ जा सकता है. मुझे नहीं लगता कि कोई एक एथिकल ऐसा तलिस्मा होगा या एथिकल सॉलिडारिटी होगा जिस एथिक्स से सब गवर्न होंगे, सारे सब्जेक्ट मैटर गवर्न होंगे. पॉसिबल नहीं है, क्योंकि एक तरफ जब हम कह रहे हैं मल्टीप्लिसिटी, तो एथिक्स भी तो मल्टीपल रियलिटी में रिफ्लेक्ट होता है, वो वन में नहीं हो सकता है. और इस थिंकिंग से ही हमें बाहर आना पड़ेगा, राइट. और इसीलिए देखिए क्या हो रहा है, व्हाट इज हैपनिंग टुडे. ईच यंग जनरेशन इज क्रिएटिंग इन देयर ओन एथिकल रियलिटी. दे आर नॉट डिक्टेटेड बाय, हम कहते हैं कि एक ऐसा एथिकल वैल्यूज हैं जैसे ह्यूमनिज्म भी यूनिवर्सल नहीं है. बहुत सारे लोग कहते हैं कि ह्यूमन यूनिवर्सल है. आई डोंट थिंक इट्स यूनिवर्सल, राइट. क्योंकि जो फाउंडेशनल है या फंडामेंटलिज्म, ये मतलब यूनिवर्सल के कॉन्सेप्ट से हमें बाहर आना पड़ेगा. यूनिवर्सल है कुछ, कोई चीज़ यूनिवर्सल नहीं. जो लोग कहते हैं कि ग्रैंड डिज़ाइन में कि ये जो यूनिवर्स की जो डिज़ाइन है वो भी यूनिवर्सल नहीं, वो भी चेंज होगा एक दिन, आप देखिए. लेकिन होगा क्या, वो बहुत समय लेगा. जैसे वो बनने में बहुत समय लिया है, वैसे वो उसके ग्रैंड डिज़ाइन को चेंज होने में टाइम लगेगा. आई डोंट थिंक दैट कि हर सब्जेक्ट कंटेंट मैटर के साथ एक साथ एथिकल सॉलिडारिटी पॉसिबल है. सो आई थिंक फ्रेंड्स, आई नो देयर आर मेनी मोर क्वेश्चंस एंड मे बी नेक्स्ट टाइम, और यू जस्ट सेंड मी द क्वेश्चंस. ऑर्गेनाइजर से मेरा एक रिक्वेस्ट होगा कि प्लीज कंपाइल ऑल द क्वेश्चंस टुगेदर and give it to me. These will I would like to use these questions at the baseline, and on the basis of that the next discussion will start. But in that discussion, I'm extremely sorry today I have taken much time because I was ambitious in my presentation. I should have curtailed my content, but anyway, next time that will not happen. But let me think something more, and with the help of your questions and deliberations and the discussions and the associations, I'll come out with something different. I have already given you, the list which I'm going to do in future. But when I'll do on that, I'm not sure. I need to read a lot. I need to discuss a lot. I need to deliberate and think and reflect, and then I'll come out with something. Why I'm stopping? Because at 3 o'clock, I have to speak on another platform. There again, the discourses, but there I'll be talking about the discourses of the digital divide. And thank you so much, the organizer, and giving me this opportunity to get connected with people. And I'm very happy that voluntarily many people have joined this. I'm so happy. And thanks, Adeen. And thanks, Dr. Gupta, and thanks to each one of you. Please remain connected, and one day I would like to listen some of you, so that we can have, I'm not saying the best perspective, but an alternative perspective. My research goal is to have an alternative knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. And ऑडियंस को भी, सबको, जितने हमारे व्यूअर्स कनेक्ट हुए थे उन सबको भी बहुत बहुत थैंक यू. ये जो था, ये हमारा आज पहला वेबिनार था ऑन द टॉपिक ऑफ नैरेटिव्स ऑफ एजुकेशनल डिस्कोर्सेस. एंड सिमिलरली इसी टाइप से आगे पूरी सीरीज होंगी. अराउंड सिमिलर क्वालिटेटिव डिस्कशंस। तो उस सब की जो भी डिटेल्स हैं वो हम फेसबुक पेज पे और आपके जो ग्रुप्स हैं उन सब पे आपको मिल जाएंगी डिटेल्स। So please stay connected and thank you once again everyone for joining us. Thank you sir. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And प्रमोद सर का एक मैसेज था आपको कि उनकी तरफ से आपको बहुत थैंक यू, और वो सॉरी बोलना चाह रहे थे क्योंकि वो अभी क्वारंटीन में है एक्चुअली, और वहाँ पे नेटवर्क का इशू है, इसलिए वो खुद पर्सनली नहीं आ पाए।
कोई दिक्कत
पर
कोई दिक्कत।
उनकी तरफ से वो आपको थैंक यू बोल रहे हैं, और मेरी तरफ से भी आपको और सारे व्यूअर्स को सबको थैंक यू।
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care. Have safe day and safe life.